Yeah.
They figured something out, they're bad guys.
Was rightfully saying efficient. Very
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
good morning again. Today is Friday the 19th. This is Senate Natural Resources United. We're resuming our work on SB 89 and act relating to renewable energy standard. It is the time of year, but schedules get tight. We're gonna do a little rescheduling in order to make sure we can finish our walkthrough today. I'm gonna ask two of our witnesses to, Mr. Sterling Dobley, please. Oh, sorry. Have nuts. Visit from both Mr. Sterling and from the PUC, then we're gonna go back to our walkthrough, finish the walkthrough today. Other witnesses will be rescheduled to the beginning of next week. My apologies, but we,
It is what it is.
we're trying to stay nimble and clear from everyone we need to hear from. So with that, thank you, Mr. Kowski.
I know, I'm weird.
So by 10:30, Ms. Chakowski.
I'll email her, I'll email her.
During the last hour for her to do a walk. Thank you, Mr. Brayman. You're gonna have to. Okay, with that, Mr. Sterling, if you could join us at the table and aim to tailor your remarks to roughly 10 to 15 minutes.
Past topic has never been a problem.
Whatever been imposed, okay,
Many other problems, but.
10:30.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
And I'm gonna put on the YouTube, so.
I just want to make sure that the time that happened, thank you. Once again, it takes a village to write a bill. Mr. Sterling, your
Hi.
turn.
Peter Sterling, Renewable Energy Department, thanks for taking the time to take up this bill, and also many thanks to Senator Brady, Senator Watts for taking so much of their off-session time to go through the 8 res working group meetings all midweek. All for many hours of time, a lot of time to put it off session to get us where we are today. So,
And like 8 planning meetings for 8 of the 8 meetings.
oh, I need to know about that, so, okay.
Jude, could you make it so I could share Peter's slides?
Excuse me,
Could you make it so I could share Peter's slides?
I
Drop them
did.
down. Okay, just, thank you, sorry.
you're waiting.
All right, so I just want to do a little review and then we'll go into the meat of this and answer some of the questions that came up earlier. So why Vermont needs to reform the renewable energy standard, you know. A really big reason is environmental justice, right? So this picture, oops, it's coming, this picture on the left is the footprint of a 60-acre, 360 megawatt baseload natural gas plant in Connecticut. 60 acres, as perspective, goes from the State House to Shaw's to the library, then up to National Life. That's what 60 acres looks like. There are 64 such plants in New England. Quick quiz for the committee. How many of them are in Vermont?
There would be 0.
0. So when we need extra power, when we need power and it's low grows, this is who we're asking to generate that power when we don't bring on new renewables. That's a really important point for you. You can see the statistics. Most are in communities of color, most have more low-income residents than average, most have little kids under 5. And you can see almost half are located where all of these are true. So this is a reason to me why we need to clean up our grid and bring on more new renewables in our region. Next, you know, the current status quo is incredibly wasteful. We keep these giant plants running even when we don't need them. And here's just one article from last summer. $500 million was given to, as part of a 2-year contract to keep this extra power. Again, when we bring on new renewables, like this red bill will do, we obviate we negate the need for plants like this to stay online. So it's not just a climate reason, there's financial benefits for getting rid of these plants and bringing on more new renewables.
Sure. I'm having trouble remembering the number, but every Vermont utility got allocated a piece of that.
I like to think I'm keeping my promise of talking fast. So this next slide, this came from the Public Service Department's latest filing of net metering rates, and I think it's pretty great for our future that the price of new wind and new solar is projected to be far, far less than bringing on new gas and new coal. Load is going to grow. More Vermonters are going to plug in their cars, put heat pumps. We know load is growing. Where will that new load come from? It's not coming from nuclear because nuclear is not growing in Vermont. I think, we certainly don't want it to come from wind and coal. We want the future load to come from wind and solar. And I think you can see from this slide, the price should not be the issue right there. Okay, so let's jump into a little bit of a visual of what H289 does. So at the bottom, you can see the descriptions of the tier. I can run through them. Tier 1 is older existing renewables. Tier 2 is in-state renewables under 5 megawatts. Tier 4 is that new in-region, think of offshore wind. So you can see the different requirements for different utilities. One of the benefits, I think, of H289 is it gives different utilities different dates and flexibility to meet these renewable goals, which are still incredibly aggressive. And then that column on the right just gives you some kind of sense of scale of how much renewables potentially could be brought on. Not granted, it could be a different mix, it could be more wind or less solar or whatever. But this gives you the sense of scale. Let me just point just to, Green Mountain Power, for example. Currently, they're bringing on about 21 megawatts a year of solar to bring on to meet their new tier 2 requirement. That would, triple. I mean, that would really help Vermonters, harden the grid, be more independent, keep more of our dollars home. I'd like to point out the one in bold right there, Green Mountain Power, and I think this is a remarkable achievement in this bill. 100% of their new load after 2035 is from new renewables. I mean, that is an incredible achievement. I mean, as part of this bill, to having our largest utility commit to all of their new load coming from a new renewable, meaning pushing fossil gas off the grid. I mean, you can see what the rest of the utilities are doing. They're all doing, I think, really significant amounts of cleaning up the grid.
Quick questions along the way, does that include hydro, renewable?
No definition was changed.
So
Hydro is renewable. The only thing that we did amend was any new hydro is not a new renewable. Meaning, so let's say hypothetically, Hydro-Quebec was to flood some more land. That would still be eligible for tier 1. We do not change that, but it would not come under the new tier 4 category. So we're not having new Hydro-Quebec compete against offshore wind, onshore wind, things like that.
and nuclear,
We kept this a renewable energy requirement. We are not allowing nuclear attributes to be retired to meet these requirements. The department has advocated for that. And thankfully, the working group agreed that that is not the path to move forward. So nuclear is not being put on par with wind and solar and hydro in this bill. The previous witness, when we're looking at this with all the tiers, previous witness Annette Smith showed you some scenarios in the land use required by those scenarios. Those scenarios do not align with the renewable energy requirements called for in H289. So the numbers she showed you, while somewhere in the ballpark of what could happen, they're not the actual number. So we did model the actual requirements of H289 for in-state, and we found that by 2030 to get to the requirement, it would take about 1,300 acres around the state of Vermont to meet our tier 2 requirements. So we're talking about 1,300 acres of land potentially being converted to solar from this bill. That was what our modeling is saying of the actual requirements of H289. So before I leave this slide, I just want to say it's a compromise bill, it's a consensus bill. That doesn't mean it's not doing a lot to move the ball forward on climate change and helping Vermont to play its part in decarbonizing our grid. The next slide. And this is one I'd like to spend a few minutes, because this has clearly come up. H289, yes, it eliminates off-site net metering, but it does not close the door for community solar. Okay. First, I want to just set the stage. It's the Public Utility Commission is the one who has really clamped down on Vermonters' ability to have community solar. Let me just give you two quick examples. One, let's say you had a 150 kilowatt community solar. It's on this perfect piece of land. It's an amazing spot. The owner said, I want to expand that to a 500 to let more people take advantage. That is something we all probably think is a great idea. The PUC said, if you want to do that expansion, you will now get the new rate with the new adders, which means you have to ask every person who's currently in that community solar to take a haircut on what they're getting. So no developer wants to do that. The other one, and I say this as someone that, some background in forestry, not all trees are created equal. Like we've all been in the woods, red pines, poplars, things like that. probably lower value for a lot of reasons. The PUC has said if you want to get the preferred rate for a net metering for community solar, you can't cut more than 3 acres of trees. If you have a perfect site and you have 4 acres, and you want to put out 500 on there, but you had some red pines in the way, you can't cut those and get the net metering rate. To me, there are so many barriers being, and now I'm not saying cut old growth, like Rev does not want to see high value important forests cleared to make room for solar. That's not, but we all know that some forests have less ecological and recreational value than others. And a couple acres of red pines being cleared to make room for a 250 kilowatt community solar rate does not seem like a big loss to me. But yet the PUC says we're not going to do that. So those rules and others, if you just look at those 3 arrows right there, since net metering 2.5 took over in September of 2022, applications for just 9 group net metering projects, only 4 have been granted. Just one of those 4 projects has been able to be built. Basically, since September of 2022, because of the changes the PUC has made to net metering rates, we are not, my folks are saying it's almost impossible to get a 150, a 250, or a 500 kilowatt community solar bill. So when we get rid of offset net metering, it's like I keep saying, there are other ways to do net metering and I mean, community solar, and then the article that I'm referencing right here just shows, you know, it's a bigger project, but it has the same exact values to the customers of having ownership, having flexibility. You're just doing it not through the net metering program. And that's what we're all committed coming back next year and hashing out. That's what we said in our working group. We said it in all the debate in the House. Rev members want to build these projects. I'll be honest, I've had Rev members quit because they are upset that we got rid of offset net metering. But for the, yeah, it was painful. But for the greater good, for moving the ball forward on renewable energy, we have to move away from some of the most expensive projects and replace them with other projects that provide the same goals, but are more honestly affordable to bring online. And so I don't believe we're closing the door on community solar at all. Yes. You know, I don't even think, you know, if you look at what the PUC is doing, you know, especially at third arrow, that when the public service department's proposal to lower net meter 2.6, the current compensation is 3 times larger a drop than just what happened from 2.4 to 2.5, which stopped these projects. So even a bigger drop is coming starting in July on net metering compensation. So we're not giving up, I don't think, any of these projects over the next, by the time it takes us to bring on new procurement programs, I don't think we're missing anything. Happy to answer questions on this.
Well, I hope that the study that we're talking about and the work that everyone committed to this summer is saying, I
Right,
can only do so many things at once.
yeah,
Will produce a program that I think people have talked about conceptually for a number of years, like clean power that serves those members of the community in a cost effective way.
and so before I leave this slide, I just want to say 2 last quick pieces, you know, I feel like, let's just be clear, it's Public Utility Commission with recommendations of the Department of Service are the ones clamping down on these kind of projects. It's not a utility, it's not Mountain Power saying we're not gonna do these, it's the regulators saying we're not gonna make these affordable. Right, so let's just, you know, understand who's making the decisions there. The other thing we heard earlier from Kathy Byer that closing the door on offset net metering would impact the Solar for All program and financing. There is no offset net metering recommendation in the Solar for All program. There's $0 there. There's offset net metering, but there is no recommendation from the Department of Public Service to take money from Solar for All and use it for group offset net metering. Maybe that's just what they wrote, so
So wait, can I,
sure.
so your contention is that she's not accurate in the fact that they could use that money towards the programs?
That's right. Well, I mean, I can show you the proposal.
Have you spoken, is she still in the room? No. Well, that is different information. And I don't disagree with you, but I don't necessarily think that that's an accurate reflection of. It could be used for, it
Can't, so.
can't at all.
We wrote a grant. We wrote an application to the Department of Energy to get this other green bank. to get this solar for all money. And in that application, the Department of Public Service spelled out specific buckets, 3 buckets of funding they want to get money for, on-site net metering for low-income folks, the larger subsidy program, and there's one other piece that's not on the top of my head, but there was no tranche of money the department requested that would fund off-site net meter solar.
So the concern that we heard from the Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, where they said, we believe this money will go away when we have a downtown developed project where we can't put solar fully on the roof to offset our need, and we would put solar elsewhere. You're telling me they would not be eligible for the federal funding that they said they thought they would be.
It's not, there may be other federal funding that I'm not aware of, but it's not through the solar for all program.
Perhaps we could nail that figure down, because that is important information. If it was never available to them for the
Not for
purpose
solar
that
for all,
they.
that's the only thing I'm saying, maybe there's other federal funding that they're pursuing, and I have no knowledge of that. But if it's, there is no money through the solar for all proposal that the Department of Public Service submitted for off-site roof net metering.
Thank you.
I hope that wish there was.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt finding that.
But then we would extend the dates if it was.
Well, they would be able to get the applications in before the deadline.
Before 2025,
Then you.
so even if they have a project.
Well, I'm not gonna say, not every single time, but then we could extend the deadline, I mean, there's options if there was millions of federal dollars coming in. But it's not,
There.
okay,
Well, I think out of the 10 million that got put into community solar bucket, 2 years ago, 3 years.
under the ARPA
I
money.
think only one project's been funded under it, so I think
Oh.
there's also funds
Right,
from
Oh,
ARPA funds from 2 years ago still unexpended.
great, I wanna stick to my 15 minutes, so.
Yeah.
Do the best I can here, so the next slide, John. So we haven't talked a lot about costs, it came up, I just wanted you to have this on the record, but the one that, I just wanna point you to is the last line, under energy costs. Any cost increase you may be hearing about occur in the context of the $14.5 billion the department projects Vermonters will spend on electricity between 2025 and 2035. So when we hear big numbers, like 40 million for this, or yes, it's a lot of money. We're spending $14 billion anyway, it's a percentage, right? So that's one piece, and you can either, and then the other one, on the transmission issue, the last two I think are pretty important. Belco, as Carrick alluded to yesterday, estimates they're spending about $500 million in transmission upgrades without any changes to the res. I mean, we're already spending so much money to make the grid better, make it more ready for renewables. So when you hear about big transmission charges, keep in the context, Belco's already doing great work to adapt Vermont's grid to a distributed generation future. And Belco, and as Carrick said this yesterday, but it's thank for saying, their long-range transmission plan states we can put about 1,050 megawatts of properly sited solar on the grid with no additional transmission costs. That's today's number, right? In most of the solar that we're gonna need, when it comes on the back end after 2030, Belco will have done another transmission plan, they will already upgraded, I predict that 1,050 number will go higher, because they don't spend $500 million amongst other things to upgrade the grid. So the future is looking better for lower cost DG, however, the numbers we have now state this 1,050 is the limit. You can see, depending on low growth of H289, we're gonna have to add 500 to 800 megawatts of solar. I'm just saying, the numbers we're hearing today in 2024 are not the numbers we're hearing in 2028. After Belco does all of its work to make our grid more ready for renewable distributed generation. All right, 2 more slides, I think. We've heard a lot we heard it yesterday from the department, how they felt like their proposal met the needs of Vermonters and the Vermonters they heard from. So, Vermonters, yes, they did support decreasing emissions, which was great. However, if you look at the pie chart on the right, Vermont, their own polling showed and focus group showed most Vermonters, the majority of Vermonters were willing to pay more money if they knew it was going for more renewable energy. And I think that backs up kind of what we're saying. Vermonters are willing to pay something reasonable to know that their power is coming from renewables. However, Vermonters never do, at least I couldn't find where Vermonters specifically said they want to see net metering become more expensive or ask for greater reliance on nuclear power. Both are foundational to the department's proposal. I went through all 180 responses the other night. One person said they wanted more local nuclear power, no one said they wanted net metering customers to pay more money. So when the department says they believe their proposal is reflective of what they heard from Vermonters. I don't know where that exactly comes from.
So,
No, I was waving to send.
Oh, that's better, okay. Okay, last slide, I'll just throw this up there, you know. H289 has the broad support it has because, look, it does something pretty spectacular. It would make Vermont tied for the first state in the country to get to 100% renewables and in a meaningful way. I would actually argue we're probably gonna beat Rhode Island because if you think of almost 90% of Vermonters will have 100% renewable energy by 2030. Global Foundries, which is one customer, 7% of the state, they won't be 100% renewable till 2035, but most all Vermonters, except if you live in a municipal utility, will be at 100% by 2030 when you count BED, WEC, ZEC, the amount of power, that's an amazing achievement. So yay Rhode Island, but I think what Vermont is doing is incredible. And you know, this is a big fight against climate change. I mean, REV's modeling shows that the actual greenhouse gas reductions from the renewables we're bringing online through H289 is equivalent to taking 240,000 cars off the road in the next 11 years. 240,000 cars coming off the road because Vermonters are incentivizing more renewable energy to be built in our region. That to me is an important accomplishment. And that's it. Yeah, there's a whole other list. Yeah, there's.
thank you.
Happy, if there are more questions.
See, thanks very much. You know, to me, the quiet story that we don't sometimes, when we talk about increased costs of cleaning things up, the cost of these very damaging pollutions,
Right.
I'm not sure how anyone imagined we would stop externalizing all that damage at zero cost going forward. I think for me, it's that we were. We
I didn't want to dork out too many more numbers, but. You know, one of the ways we've gotten to the problem we have with the climate crisis is we only think of costs, like what is the cost of the heat in, what is the cost of the electric bill? We don't look at the savings on the other side, which are somewhat hard to quantify, but you know. This renewable energy bill has something like the department found $41 million in health benefits. A net debt savings are like $400 million when you factor in the social cost of carbon. And other climate benefits, right? I mean, those are all in, I mean, I could put slides up on that, but this has enormous other benefits that, you know, we can go to that are important if we don't want to destroy this planet.
Yeah.
It's big.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for taking the time.
That's perfect. Big thanks for the jumping in. With that, I'd like to go to Mr. McNamara, Sheriff McNamara, and Ms. Schilling. I don't know if you want to please throw up a second chair or.
I'll stay here.
Dial of friends on the
I
side.
need to address second time.
No, phone a friend chair. All right. Good morning, Mr. McNamara. Chair McNamara.
For the record, Ed McNamara, Chair of the Public Utility Commission. Just gonna go through a couple of things, a couple technical corrections that we'd like to discuss with this high level context.
Yeah.
So the electric sector represents 2.2% of Vermont's GHG emissions. I'm bringing that up because what we're doing is in the context of GWSA. GWSA does count, or sorry, ANR is the one who prepares the GHG inventory that's being relied on for GWSA. And the reason that the electric sector is 2.2% is because the utilities, DEC, GMP in particular, have significant amounts of nuclear, Seabrook, and then Williston as well. So what we're doing, at least in some of the near term, in the next 5 years, is actually phasing out nuclear, which is no carbon, from a GHG perspective, and simply replacing it with renewables. So just noting that for context of the immediate impact is not that much of passing this fairly limited in terms of GHG emissions. Obviously, electrification of thermal and transportation sectors is going to alter that percentage over time as we reduce emissions from thermal and transportation is going to show up in the electric sector. And then absent any changes in the RES requirements, there is the possibility for some of the power purchase agreements to drop out. I want to talk about costs just briefly. So the most recent estimate from JFO, 150 million to 450 million from 2025 to 2035, as Mr. Sterling noted, that's actually, it's a few percent of the total 14 billion. It's completely right. There's a lot of money that we spend in Vermont. Typically over $800 million on electric costs. So total electric costs. Just want to note that we also have other cost pressures as well. A big component of this is new regional, and a lot of the discussion around new regional is offshore wind. That's going to require a significant amount of transmission to actually build out. That's going to be billions of dollars in addition to whatever we do. We're going to be paying portions of that as well. So keeping in mind that there's additional costs in there. And regardless of any innovative rate designs, increased costs do have some impact on electrification. I'm not saying that the cost of RES are going to stop all electrification efforts, but it's a cost benefit analysis for individual homeowners about how much does it cost to run a heat pump compared to oil. We have no control, or we don't control the international market for oil and gas. And so therefore the cost effectiveness has been varied year by year. So we'll have some impact. Again, not claiming it's going to stop it as some
That additional transmission for instance, to enable offshore wind, is that speed flows through to Vermont into the network service charge that we get? How do we get billed that?
there's. So just to be clear, Vermont's not paying the billions of dollars, we're
Right.
paying a portion of those billions of dollars. It's a cost allocation, which is still a work in progress. I think of it just as 4%. It really is regional reliability, it's 4%, so a few hundred million. Most of it over time. So. Just I'm noting that because I'm not sure that that has been brought up, that regional new piece does have additional components that happen outside of Vermont. Want to talk a little bit about the impact on the PUC in particular. So current res is fairly straightforward. What we have now, different timelines and requirements depending on the category of utility. Was described as a choose your own adventure in terms of having which utility is doing what at what year. It's not an issue. The PUC can obviously keep track of all of this. It's a little bit more confusing, requires somewhat more resources from the commission and presumably the GPS track. I do want to note during the rulemaking and also doubling the in-state requirements is going to result in more 248 petitions for the PUC for review. All of this is manageable with existing staff. It starts impinging on our ability to take on additional work. Though there's only so much we can reasonably get out of staff for PUC, and the more incremental work that you're adding, the less additional things that we can do.
And just to make sure I'm following, you're saying 289 is proposed, it's manageable, but there are other things that are under discussion that we would, in essence, if you all take on this work, include the additional resource doing that other work.
Yeah, I'll just say in the House, S305, there was some additions to that, including thermal energy networks for the PUC to basically design a brand new regulatory regime for thermal energy networks. Customers with low income also having us provide recommendations on how to help make electricity costs more equitable. Energy savings accounts, which is Efficiency Vermont program in lieu of Efficiency Vermont. All of these on their own are not showstoppers for us. When we start adding a lot of work within a 2-year period, it becomes problematic. Is more what I'm saying, starting to flag the issue rather than say, I don't want you to be surprised if I come in next year and say, no, Moss, we can't do it.
And yes, like we're going through the buffet, we may be doing too many things on the plate.
Yeah. And again, it's manageable, res in particular, we have a rule, we can update it. 248s, do 248s all the time, there's gonna be more of them. It is, we're gonna have to decide what to do with resources, it might take a little bit longer for some of the 248s to come through, we're doubling the number of them. Or for us to issue the orders on 248s. There's also gonna be some changes on net metering. Oh, so I mentioned net metering rule is going to have to be updated and res rule. Net metering rules, relatively minor updates. Res rule is definitely more significant. Michelle provided or has prepared some draft legislation that would essentially say, can we do things outside of the typical APA process for interim updates to these rules so we can get them quickly? I'm much more concerned about the res rule because that requires fairly quick turnaround and it was somewhat significant. We can incorporate that language as well. This simply saying do rules and as an order. Notwithstanding the provisions of the APA, and I believe there's the provisions that we come back and do a full rulemaking under the APA once that is done.
If you could send that to me and Ms. Newman and to Mr. Chakowski.
Great, thank you. And then the last impact,
Mr. Chair, can I just change, is that a recommended change that would be made to the bill?
I guess,
Recommend change, right, and language we're still looking at.
yes,
Are we actively considering this type of language, and if we have recommendations other than what the piece is put forward, should we email them?
How we navigate the legislative process, I'm not sure there's more than one way to get to the finish line, so.
yeah, for us, it's just there's no substance here other than it's just a process of how can we get this done quickly to provide clarity. And it will,
Bills in the building,
I'm sorry,
I was saying, you're kind of right, there are many bills in the building.
yeah,
So.
I'm just when a statute is passed, obviously it trumps the rule. Everybody's aware of that, but when you have a statute over here and a rule that says something different in some period of time, when there's both existing at the same time, there's a lack of clarity and it provides a lot of inefficiency for everybody. That's,
Oh, I'm not disagreeing with your suggestion at all, I'm just trying to understand the process if we're going to make changes, because I assume that would not allow us to concur.
Yes, and there's a lot of ways to get the work done, so I'm just saying let's take in the testimony and think about how to do some creative problem solving to get all the work we do done.
last point, I just want to say there's always possibility for legal challenges to any new rules, any new mechanism, speculative, purely speculative, but that's something that exists, and when it does happen, it's very disruptive. We do have a couple proposed technical corrections, and this really does get to, one of them, I believe I would characterize as technical corrections, even though it is does get to the intent. And this is about, that metering system.
Yeah.
There's proposed language that would change the definition of the net metering system to one that generates energy that will be used on the same parcel or a parcel adjacent to the parcel where the plant is located. Based on discussions and house energy, it seemed really clear that that means that all of the energy generated actually is being used on the parcel. So we simply recommend adding the word exclusively in the definition to make it clear.
With Ms. Dwyer being able to cross the street and get some. Stick of butter for her system there. That language.
If they're not abutting now.
I think you're talking about consumption, right, like the. Of the.
My understanding is that it would have to be there would not be another entity that's billing to that same system, connected to that same system. That's my understanding. Am I correct?
So Elizabeth Schilling with the Vermont Public Utility Commission for record. So the issue is potentially that's drafted right now
if just 1% of the energy were used on the parcel or an adjacent parcel, potentially someone could interpret that as 99% to be contracted to then be used virtually far, far away. And we believe the intent was that all the energy that was generated be consumed either on site or on the adjacent site. And however many customers might be using it on site or on the adjacent site. That would be the clarification, and certainly they would still be able to feed energy back to the grid if they're not using it. But it would be used on site.
So the original intent and that being offsetting your own load.
The return of metering back to what they
Generator of sort. Okay.
Exactly.
And it wouldn't impact if there were multiple meters on one property.
And there could be multiple meters on one site or the adjacent site. That's not affected.
Yeah.
So the billing.
But it could be different utility account holders with
Yes.
different meters. So if I had maybe a farm that I ran for my business, and then I had a home on that same location, I, under your new language, could use both of those. Now, even though they're separate billing accounts.
Yes, there could be multiple.
On the side of-
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just thinking about the definition for a condo association where if we might have multiple units where the owner is. Each one of them is billed separately, but it's just one parcel.
That's still, yeah. The intent is really, as Senator Bray said, to return us back to the concept of net metering where you're using generation that's actually on the site.
Yeah,
The consumption and generation are paired.
it's super interesting. So you could have a form of group net metering if it was, or multiple people living on the same person.
So,
Correct. That's very interesting.
Yeah, this is not eliminating group net metering, it's eliminating virtual. Right?
Yes.
Correct.
Great. Thanks. Last technical amendment is in section 4 of the bill. There's a line on page 14, lines 11 and 12. The commission determines the report required under subdivision 8005B. And 8005B no longer exists, it's explicitly repealed. So there's a reference that needs to be adjusted in that. The idea of the report is that we're looking at it to determine whether there's, I believe, enough new regional. There is another piece in section 7 of the bill that actually requires us to do that report. Section 7 is changing language regarding the comprehensive energy plan. PUC has no role in developing comprehensive energy plan. I would just strongly recommend that we fix the reference in section 4 and then either add to session law or put it somewhere in the actual res statute itself, the requirement that we conduct this report on the amount of regional being removed so available.
So the language you're sending over to the.
We can add that as well.
You can add that.
Those as well.
Yep,
Thank you.
that's all I have.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
We will watch for that.
Great.
And go back to a walkthrough with council.
Thank you.
Yes. Probably almost here. As we speak. And we've been monitoring it from. Senator Connell. Seeing your hand move, is that a hand move or?
It was
Hey.
Bring up Bill on, it means nothing.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to share their skit from last night while we have a?
well, I would say,
Break.
we need to make sure that we take a special moment to thank Sam for his history of Kathy Gray's skit.
Oh.
Which I know I was the only audience member presence, phenomenal. And I'm not gonna tell you any of the jokes because you weren't there and it's unfair for you to get, you know, it happens to happen.
I actually cut a lot out. So I got the sense it was going on. So I cut a lot out. This is one big top, so,
Well, you may need to show the photo that you shared with a few of us.
oh, yeah.
It's very-
What year, history, what was the old time cabaret hit by anybody that you could recall?
Slowly I turned. The vaudeville was, and I was in that, but it's not my work, it was Ralph Wright. Was the victim.
Casey and Bat was
Ralph Wright.
from recitated from memory. Yeah.
How's it, campfire fun?
People stand by.
And it's exactly. Ms. Kelsey, thank you for coming back. So we have 45 minutes. We'd love to pace ourselves to finish the walkthrough in that time. Thank you.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So yesterday we left off on page 8 of H 289 is passed the House. This is the section 4 of the bill that makes the changes to the renewable energy standard tiers. So yesterday I was describing at the top of page 8 that currently in statute, it is tier 1 is 75% renewable by 2032. This is changing it to 100% renewable. But on line 6, it sets up that there are 2 different dates, which I think you have heard about. So it's 100% renewable. On or after January 1, 2035. For a retail electricity provider who serves a single customer that takes service at 150 kilovolts. That's GlobalFoundries. And each municipal retail electricity provider formed under local charter or chapter 79 of the state. So for the municipal electric utilities and GlobalFoundries, 100% renewable by 2035. And for all others, well, January 1, 2030 for all other retail electricity providers.
Local charters, that's municipal, electric. Or chapter 179, is that the cooperative? What's
No, that's junk, that is another, it's just munis, so we're just talking about
that's in
this
there,
here.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And so to remind you, there are 18 utilities. We have 1 investor-owned utility, that's Green Mountain Power. There are 2 cooperatives, WEC and BEC. Then there are a whole group of municipal utilities. And then there's GlobalFoundries, the newest one that has a single customer. And so that is largely how we are describing on this bill is we serve a single customer that takes out 115 kilovolts. So next, it's adding the reference to the tiers in this section, so distributed generation used to meet tier 2 counts towards tier 1. New renewable energy, which is gonna be tier 4, and load growth, they'll all count towards the requirements. So this is just reiterating that tier 1 is total renewable energy, so it's all the components of the portfolio, including the other tiers, go into making up the 100% renewable. Small change farther down on this page. So on petition of provider that is a municipal electric utility serving not more than 7,000 customers, they can reduce, the commission may reduce the requirement. So there's a couple provisions in here where that references the municipal electric utilities with less than 6,000 customers. That's being increased to 7,000 because of population growth and some of these small ones. Okay,
So are these basically, these will only be munis?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On page 9, so now we're to tier 2.
And just as a, so historical note, like when we did this in the beginning, of the teams. We also recognized that the smaller utilities had less of ability to take on a common program, so they had delayed implementation, and that was. Gave them a little more time to get up and running.
So
Sharing so that people don't think, isn't it weird that we're separating them out? It's like even in the beginning, we saw that they're a small municipal utility that doesn't have a group of analysts in a back room that can do the work for them. Give them extra time.
So on page 9, tier 2. Tier 2 is distributed renewable generation. So the first thing that's happening in tier 2 is it's changing the definition. So distributed renewable generation, so what counts towards tier 2 means a renewable energy plant that has capacity of 5 megawatts or less, so smaller projects, is one of the following: new renewable energy, a hydroelectric renewable energy plant that is on or before January 1, 2024, owned or operated by a municipal electric utility formed under local charter or chapter 79 of this title as of January 1, 2020. Including future plant modifications that do not cause the capacity of such a plant to exceed 5 megawatts. Or a hydroelectric renewable energy plant that is on or before January 1, 2024, owned and operated by a retail electricity provider that is not a municipal electric utility, provided that such a plant is and continues to be certified by the Low Impact Hydropower Institute, also called LIHI. Plants owned by such utilities on or before January 1, 2024, which are later certified by the Low Impact Hydropower Institute and continue to be certified, shall be eligible under this subdivision from the date of certification. Any future modification that do not cause the capacity of such a plant to exceed 5 megawatts shall also be eligible under this subdivision.
General?
Thank you, so on back page 9, let's see, lines 13 through 17, I'm just confused about the 2 dates that are in there, can you just explain what's happening? Is it's sort of like, as of this year. It have been formed as of 2020. It's just, like, it's just a little weird.
Yep. So the dam has to have been owned by the utility as of January 1, 2024. And actually, I'm trying to remember the distinction that's being made here. I think
We can come back to it.
well, I'm sure someone in the room knows.
Sounds like we were kind of accommodate different projects that probably already exist.
I'm wondering if it's 2020, if they are, yes, applies to like the remainder of the sentence, like or sentence doesn't.
Well, it wouldn't be the rest, I'm wondering if it's the use that the utility itself was in existence by January 1, 2020.
Okay. Okay.
And there's some free category, like 18, line 18 and on. I think we've had over the years different owners of such products, low impact, high in-stage hydro. That sell into the marketplace, come in and make sure that we don't. Cut them out of becoming eligible to be part of the renewable energy.
So this is a change in that these currently under tier 2, all these projects need to be new as defined in statute. But this is adding a carve out for hydroelectric. Either owned by a municipal utility or one of the other utilities, that is not new.
It's a stove.
I mean, Stowe potentially qualifies, I don't know the details of that, but I think there are multiple, which is why we have two different parent subdivisions on it, so. Yes. But these dams themselves are old. And then, so on page 10, the rest of this is that, and is also one of the following. Directly connected to the substation or distribution system of a Vermont retail electricity provider. Directly connected to the transmission system of an electric company. Or is a net metering system. So that part isn't changing, it still needs to be directly connected, so that's sort of the local component. But the change here is that you're now allowing these old hydroelectric facilities that wouldn't have counted because they are not new. So then at the bottom of page 10, the percentages are changing, so the required amounts of distributed renewable generation shall be 5.8% of the retail electricity provider's annual load during the year beginning on January 1, 2025. To page 11, increasing by at least an additional 1.5% each subsequent January until reaching 20% on and after January 1, 2035. For a retail electricity provider who serves a single customer that takes service at 150 kilovolts, and each municipal electric utility formed under a local charter. And 2% each subsequent January until reaching 20% on and after January 1, 2032 for all other retail electricity providers. So again, setting up two different dates for the different types of utilities.
Different steps and different timelines. Yeah. Okay.
So there is this existing provision in tier 2 that allows for a utility to apply to the PUC to use power that's coming from a source greater than 5 megawatts. So there already is this process set up in here where they can request that. But new language is being added to it on page 12. So on page 12, or
The petition is going to whom?
the commission, the PUC,
Yeah.
they oversee this whole program. And so, or it has only one retail electricity customer who takes service at 150 kilovolts on property owned or controlled by the customer. As of January 1, 2024, such provider may seek leave under this subdivision for a period greater than a given year. So currently, a utility can say, hey, I don't have enough small renewable energy for this tier, can I use a larger project to account for it? And they will be able to get that for 1 year. This is saying that Global Foundries is allowed to request this and it can be for longer than 1 year.
They have. Whatever, they're a different kettle of fish than like all the other utilities.
Yes.
In part because of how little territory they have.
Down at the bottom of page 12 in tier 3. The tier 3 language is being updated, so for energy transformation category, the required amount shall be 7.33% of each retail electricity provider's annual load during the year beginning January 1, 2025, and increasing at least an additional 0.2% each subsequent January until reaching 12% on or after January 1, 2032. So the overall total in 2032 is not increasing, unlike the other tiers, but it is going from retail sales to load again.
So the first jump in line 17, that's just to square up where we are now.
Yeah.
We set a new baseline, it's not like we just went up 5.33, we already did the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 13, the same reference to, small municipal utilities with not more than 7,000 customers. That is being changed, again as well, because they have a slightly different requirement where they're, the required amount shall be 6% of the provider's, load. Beginning on January 1, 2025. And so again, it's increasing until 10 and 2/3%, and so that isn't changing, but the change to load is being changed.
And that reflects that delayed start I was talking about earlier.
Yep. And then there's some additional language here. In order to support progress towards Vermont's climate goals and requirements, a retail electricity provider may, but shall not be required to, exceed the statutorily required amounts up to and including procuring all available energy transformation category projects and measures available at or below the relevant alternative compliance payment rate. So, this is stating what is sort of already understood, I think, which is if a utility wants to do more than is required, they can.
Okay.
So on page 13, there's a new tier being added, tier 4, new renewable energy. So the purpose, this subdivision 4 established the new regional renewable energy category for the RES. This category encourages the use of new renewable generation to support the reliability of the regional ISO New England electric system. To satisfy this requirement, a provider shall use new renewable energy with environmental attributes attached or any class of tradable RECs generated by any renewable energy plant coming into service after January 1, 2010, whose energy is capable of delivery in New England. So this category is very similar to tier 2. It is new renewable energy from anywhere within capable of delivery in New England. The only difference with tier 2 is the size requirement. And tier 2 does have the sort of directly connect to the transmission, so it's allowing for a broader, outside of Vermont projects, and they can be of any size.
For the ones that are inside, so the 2010 date, that allows. Some people call it reforming at Lowell. The Lowell projects in post 2010 PPG date, right?
Presumably, I don't know the details of which projects fall into that, but yes, it was chosen to capture certain projects.
Thank you.
So on page 14, required amounts and exemption. A retail electricity provider that is 100% renewable shall be exempt from any requirement for new renewable under this subdivision. So there are already 3 utilities that are 100% renewable, so they do not have to comply with this specific provision.
That's being wet effect.
Yeah.
Swan.
Yeah. For all other retail electricity providers, the amount of new renewable energy required by this section shall be. For a retail electricity provider with 75,000 or more customers, the following percentages for each provider's annual load. 4% beginning on January 1, 2027, 10% on and after January 1, 2030, 15% January 1, 2032, 20% on and after January 1, 2035. If the commission determines in the report required under subdivision 8005B of this title that it is reasonable to expect that there will be sufficient new regional renewable sources available for a provider to meet the requirement under the subdivision at or below the alternative compliance payment rate established in subdivision 6C of this subsection during a year beginning prior to January 1, 2035, the commission shall require the provider to meet the requirement under the subdivision in the earliest year the commission determines it can, provided that the provider shall not be required to meet the requirement prior to the year starting January 2032. So there's gonna be a report where the PUC evaluates whether or not there is enough renewable energy available for GMP to be able to comply with this. And so then if there is, they shall require them to meet the requirements.
These ones, yeah, shorts, right? You can't restrict it by what's not on the market.
So on page 15. For a retail electricity provided with less than 75,000 customers, that's everyone except GMP. 5% beginning on January 1, 2030, and 10% January 1, 2035. Relationship to other categories, distributed renewable generation used to meet the requirements of tier 2 shall not also count towards tier 4. And an energy transformation project under tier 3 shall not count towards the requirements of this tier 4. Single customer provider, if a retail electricity provider with one customer taking service at 115 kilovolts has not satisfied the distributed renewable generation requirements of tier 2 on property owned or controlled by the customer as of January 1, 2024, the cost of additional distributed renewable generation would be at or above the ACP for the distributed generation category. Or meeting that requirement with new renewable energy on its property would be economically infeasible. That provider may satisfy the requirements of tier 2 with an equivalent amount of increased new renewable energy as defined in tier 4.
You can't do it in your territory, you could go outside your territory. Would be cheap.
Yeah, well, yes,
You still have the same obligation.
Same.
Portfolio.
yes, same renewable energy requirement, but. In tier 2, there was the out given for them to use for projects larger than 5 megawatts.
Yeah.
This is also saying if it's economically infeasible for them to get renewable generation, they can go to larger regional generation.
Here's one verify. Now, I've got this right, some of these tiers are subsets of other tiers, they're not completely separate things.
No,
Because the definition seems to overlap.
no, so in general, we are all talking about all renewable energy for all of it, so tier 1, all the other tiers below it fit into tier 1.
Yeah, okay, that's all I heard.
Yeah. So then. There's another new component to this, which is load growth, which is sort of tier 5, but it takes place after the other tiers all reach 100, once they reach the 100% renewable. So on page 16. For any retail electricity provider that is 100% renewable under the subdivision, that provider shall meet its load growth above its 2024 calendar year load with at least the following percentages of new renewable energy or any renewable energy eligible under subdivision 2. So, as was just mentioned, the 100% renewables don't have to comply with the tier 4 requirement, but they do have to cover their load growth with new renewable energy. So, 50% of their load growth is renewable on beginning on January 1, 2025. 75% on and after January 1, 2026, 90% on and after January 1, 2027, 100% on and after January 1, 2028, until the provider's annual load exceeds 135% of the provider's 2022 annual load, at which point the provider shall meet its additional load growth of at least 50% new renewable energy until 2035. And then 75% on and after January 1, 2035. For a retail electricity provider with 75,000 or more customers. And for each provider, excluding any provider that is 100% renewable. That is a member of VIPSA, Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, or its successor, that provider shall meet its load growth above its 2035 calendar year load with 100% renewable energy, which shall include the required amounts of distributed renewable generation and renewable. So the first part is for the 100% renewables, they're already there, they need to start covering their load growth. The second part is for the other entities that the other utilities, they need to start covering their load growth in 2035 after they've already reached 100%. On page 17. On petition of a retail electricity provider subject to the load growth requirements, the commission may, for a given year, allow the provider to employ existing renewable energy with environmental attributes attached or RECs from an existing renewable plant to satisfy all or part of the load growth requirement if the provider demonstrates that after making every reasonable effort, it is unable during the year to meet the requirement of energy with environmental attributes attached or RECs from qualified new renewable. To demonstrate this inability, the provider shall at a minimum timely issue one or more subsequent requests for proposals or transactions and any additional solicitation that's necessary to show that it is unable to obtain sufficient ownership of environmental attributes from new renewable to meet its required amounts under the subdivision at a cost that is less than or equal to the alternative compliance payment. In the event that the provider is able to meet a portion but not all of its load growth with new renewable at a cost less than or equal to the ACP, the commission shall allow the provider to use existing renewable energy for that portion. On page 18. In the event the provider is unable to meet its load growth requirement with a combination of attributes from new renewable and existing renewable at a cost less than or equal to the ACP, the commission shall require the provider to meet the remaining portion by paying the alternative compliance rate. Notwithstanding any other provision of law to the contrary, any additional energy available to a retail electricity provider that is 100% renewable under agreements approved or authorized by the Public Utility Commissions in its April 15, 2011 order issued in docket 7670, petition of 20 Vermont utilities and Vermont Public Power Supply, requesting authorization for the purpose of 218 megawatts and 225 megawatts of electricity. Shall also be eligible to meet the requirements laid out in subdivision A of this subdivision, provided that additional energy does not exceed 2 megawatts, and that further provides that the retail electricity provider exercises its right to such energy on or before January 1, 2028, and for no longer than December 31st, 2038. This is a specific carve out for WEC that has energy that it contracted for under this very specific PUC docket. So this is a very specific and narrow case where they are allowed to use this energy in a not up to 2 megawatts of it from 2028 to 2038 to count towards this category.
Yeah. Can you just very briefly characterize what that purchase is, a power purchase agreement?
Okay, yeah, so that is the docket that establishes the purchase of Hydro-Quebec power for the whole state. Yeah. So this is Hydro-Quebec, large hydro, I believe, and so they have access to this power. And would it normally qualify under this definition for this category? But in that future period, they will be eligible to use it if they need to for this category. It was a very specific situation. If you want to hear from them, they'll probably.
Yeah, well, and also it will make not to exceed 2 megawatts.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So on page 19, these are the alternative compliance payments. So there's already language in here on the alternative compliance payment rates. This is adding for the new categories. For new renewable and load growth, it'll be 4 cents per kilowatt hour annually commencing January 1, 2025, with calculations for inflation beginning on January 1, 2023. The commission shall have the authority to adjust the ACP for the new renewable energy and load growth requirements differently from the rate of inflation in order to minimize discrepancy between this rate and ACPs from similar classes in other New England states, and to increase the likelihood that Vermont retail electricity providers cost effectively achieve these requirements if it determines doing so is consistent with state energy policy. So this is giving the PUC authority to adjust the ACPs based on how other states in New England have set their ACPs.
So for instance, if we do just mathematically keep driving higher to adjust for inflation and get out of alignment maybe with the state.
I don't know, I can't, there's some interesting math that happens in here, especially with inflation that I don't totally understand, so. So on page 20, the next category is, some updates to the biomass requirements. So, biomass is not required to be used to satisfy any of this, but it is an option of type of facility that utilities can use. So, distributed renewable generation that employs biomass to produce electricity shall be eligible to count toward a provider's distributed generation or energy transformation requirement only if the plant satisfies the requirements of subdivision 3 of this subsection and produces both energy and thermal energy, electricity and thermal energy from the same biomass fuel. And then the majority of the energy recovered from the plant is thermal energy. So on to page 21. So there's first energy transformation projects that use wood feedstock, except for non-commercial applications that are eligible at the time of project commissioning to meet the renewability standards adopted by the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Rec, do not lose eligibility due to a subsequent change in the renewability standards after the project commissioning date. And then subdivision 3 adds some new requirements on biomass facilities. So no new wood biomass electricity generation facility or wood biomass combined heat and power facility coming into service after January 1, 2023 shall be eligible to satisfy any requirement of this section and section 8004 unless that facility achieves 60% overall efficiency and at least a 50% net life cycle greenhouse gas emissions reduction relative to the life cycle emissions from the combined operation of a new combined cycle natural gas plant using the most efficient commercially available technology. Any energy generation using wood feedstock from an existing wood biomass electric generation facility satisfying requirements of this section. Changes to wood biomass electric facilities that were placed into service before 2023, including converting to a combined heat and power facility, adding or modifying a district energy system, replacing electric generation equipment, or empowering the facility with updated or different electric generation technologies, do not change the in-service date for the facility or affect the eligibility standard to satisfy the requirements of this section or qualify as a renewable energy. So this is saying that new wood biomass facilities, in order to qualify to be used in the RES, have to meet this, it's a high efficiency standard.
And that ones that wouldn't qualify can make improvements to their systems, but not lose that grandfathered status.
Sorry, accommodate which facilities?
I'm not, so the first part of this is prohibiting the use of new biomass facilities that do not meet the high standard.
But if they're old ones. That. The place will not be mentioned.
Well, if there's two EG, like we can mention, so McNeil and Rygate. That have, they're in service prior to January 1, 2023. And it sounds like we're allowing for technology upgrades. But the fact that they're getting a technology upgrade won't cost them their status of having been online prior to January 2020.
So if they become more efficient, they're no worse off than they are there.
Right.
Then I think you got a free ride.
I mean, we wouldn't want a disincentive for them to make improvements, like if they were to improve and they would lose that status and they would no longer be considered renewable. And we would help encourage them not to make improvements.
So on page 22, there's some intent language added, so nothing in this section is intended to relieve, modify, or in any manner affect a renewable energy plan's ongoing obligation to not have an undue adverse effect on air and water purity, natural environment, and the use of natural resources, and to comply with the required environmental laws and rules. All right, next, so, moving into section 6086A. This is on greenhouse gas reduction credits, which is an existing program, though I don't think has been used. But it's being updated to give another option for global boundaries to be able to comply with tier 3. So it's adding greenhouse gas credits generated by an eligible ratepayer shall result in adjustment of the standard offer under subdivision 8005A C1. Or may be utilized by a retail electricity provider, page 23, that serves a single customer and takes that service 115 kilovolts to meet the energy transformation requirements of tier 3. And so it adds that language again, and so basically, this section is being updated that previously under this program, the eligible ratepayer was Global Foundries, so this was already sorted for them. But now they're not, now they are their own entity, so they weren't, they're going to be aggregated from being a customer of DMP. So it's clarifying that, so eligible ratepayer means Global Foundries, eligible provider means Global Boundaries down at the bottom. So on to page 24. So an eligible reduction, and so how they get these credits means a reduction of non-energy related greenhouse gas emissions from manufacturing processes at an in-state facility of Global Boundaries. Provided that each of the following applies, the reduction results from a specific project undertaken by the eligible ratepayer at their facility after January 1, 2023. The specific project reduces or avoids greenhouse gas emissions above any reductions required by federal and state laws. The reductions are quantifiable and verifiable by an independent third party as approved by ANR and the commission. The independent third party shall be certified by the American National Standards Institute as having a certification program that meets the ISO standards applicable to verification and validation of greenhouse gas assertions. The independent third party shall use methodologies specified in 40 CFR Part 98 and in the U.S. Environmental Protection Greenhouse Gas Emission Factors and Global Warming Potential Figures to quantify and verify reductions in all cases where those factors and figures are available.
So the point is, meeting GWSA, there's more than one type of greenhouse gas. If they can reduce reductions using a process improvement, they could be considered as a technique for meeting the requirements of the other gas.
Yeah, yes, although, I mean, I don't think you need to mention the Global Warming Solutions Act. I mean, it is relevant, but yeah, this is about meeting tier 3. And so it is another option because tier 3 to be energy transformation, greenhouse gas reduction, and this is specifically allowing the manufacturing reduction of GHG to be reduced.
Here, that's back to a fossil fuel GHG reduction.
So then on page 25. Eligible reduction shall be quantified in metric tons of CO2 equivalent in accordance with the methodologies of 40 CFR Part 898 and using EPA greenhouse gas emission factors and global warming potential figures, and shall be counted annually for the life of the specific project that reflected as a reduction. A project that converts a gas with a high global warming potential into a gas with a relatively lower global warming potential shall be eligible if the conversion produces CO2 equivalent reduction on an annual basis. All right, so on to page 26. It's striking the language that says they shall pass the savings on to the ratepayers, but they are the ratepayer. All right, so section 6 starts.
I think so we are being called to the floor. And what I'd like to propose is to say thank you. We stop here. In acknowledgement that it's even with our best efforts to meet, move, and stay timely with the legislative calendar, we're squeezed time-wise. I'd like to check in with the committee and see if people, because it hates to say this out loud, would be able to meet on Monday. And here's part of my concern is that Tuesday, we're gonna have a T-bill reported and a constitutional amendment reported. So because 4 precedes our meeting, I'm afraid we may lose most of our meetings on Tuesday. And I'd like to find a way to have enough time to finish this walk through it with a witness, but we have to look at it. Pardon me?
What time?
Well, it's up for discussion. I mean,
Yeah, I have a job, you know, like my boss, I have missed quite a substantial amount of work on my job. So I need to know exact times and like I have to submit a request.
Another alternative,
yes,
perhaps without cutting into government operations, maybe we could meet at 4:30
Today.
today.
Because this is a morning committee, I'm not misarrangements here, but I have to go through. I'm leaving.
Okay.
Today, I'm leaving.
today.
And I am not available
On Monday.
today, no, Monday's fine, but at 4:30 on a Friday.
Okay,
What time do you need? So
Well-
like I'll have to call.
this is, yeah, so thank you. Apologies. This is, as I was saying. Senator Watson, I hate to even bring the topic up. We've been adding time over and over again to keep moving bills, and so it's with great reluctance I've contemplated, but I would say probably 3 hours is enough. Maybe
If we're gonna do 3 hours, I mean, I'm gonna have to drive up here and I'll stay the night if I come up, so.
Why don't we do late? So you could work early with bosses.
Yeah, I should do 9 to 12.
well, so late.
It's not nice.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I can work from 9 to 12 and then I can
Okay.
drive up and be there for 1,
How
take you an
about
hour.
if we go 1 to 4?
Yeah, can I ask my boss
Yeah.
before I agree?
I can be, I can make 3 hours.
Okay,
So in the morning, I gotta get my hair braided.
yeah, it was good as far
My
as.
third cancellation.
Oh, you gotta go on that.
Okay,
Cover this.
all right, so if you could check.
Yes,
Thank you
I will
very
ask.
much. I appreciate everyone's ability. Like a least attractive. The best, worst option for something like that, the best, not so great option. Okay, so we'll tentatively plan on 1 to 4, we should hear back from Senator White. Again, thank you for everyone, so let's leave it that way. We'll adjourn, planning to come back on Monday, and update Yeah, that, you can reschedule. Yeah,
We can meet before the floor on Tuesday.
well, we could meet. I was sort of keeping that, yet another request if we needed it, because there's more work to be done. That way, if we could, for instance, we could vote on Monday, we could complete legislative work on Monday, and there was a legislative day on the general calendar. Okay, so thank you, everyone. We'll pick up on page 26 on Monday. We'll reschedule Mr. Atkinson. And
Mia.
Mia Watson, thank you. So we'll have those two witnesses in as well as finish our walkthrough and.
On Monday, scheduled on for Tuesday, but I'll change it. You want them on Monday?
Well, let's leave it alone till we know for sure that we can
Okay.
pull off Monday, but for